I'd like to invite Dr. Karina Andreou to...
The fission of 1 gram of uranium per day liberates about 1 million watts of energy. This is a huge amount of energy.
What happens to the fuel?
Out of control than they're willing to admit.
It's escaped into the wild, essentially.
Absolutely.
My name is Martin Fackler. I am the Tokyo Bureau Chief. And the title, as we just heard, was Challenges and Opportunities After the Fukushima Nuclear Disaster. Now we're going to look at the other side of the nuclear coin, if you will, which is civilian nuclear use, this crisis management.
If we get up to about 7 becquerels per cubic meter, that's beyond what I'm actually expecting. That would be 1,000 times less than what we're allowed to have in our drinking water. An interesting thing about cesium-137 is that it was not present in the environment before 1940s, because only in 1940s fission started to be used for nuclear power releases. So any container which was hermetically closed before 1940s does not contain any cesium-137. It is one way to actually show that the content of the container has a history of more than 60 years or so. That's the way to prove it. It should not have any cesium.
And the question of what do you tell your public?
Currently in Japan, in the water right off the beach at Fukushima, if you stayed in the water for the whole day, you would receive on the order of 10 nanosieverts in the course of the day. In other words, about 0.3% of the normal daily dose that everyone gets.
Do you tell them that there's a serious nuclear accident?
As I say, I want to see more nuclear power stations.
Or do you play it down?
Radiation isn't a problem for the world.
You try to cover it up.
And nuclear is nothing but positive, and we need it.
And we were involved in a NRC, U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission hearing on July 28th of this year, where the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission basically admitted that fuel fragments found over 1.5 miles away from the facility did not come from explosions from the fuel pool, from those spent fuel pools up on top of the reactor buildings that we've been talking about. These were fuel, according to the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, those fuel fragments were ejected from the reactor cores in those explosions. And so, again, the problem is that
reactors which use uranium and the fuel, usually you have a low enriched uranium fuel which contains 3% of uranium-235, which is fissile, and 97% of uranium-238. And this is the fresh fuel. Then you run it in the reactor, then you have a fuel which is consumed, doesn't contain uranium-235 in such quantities, and this fuel is different. It has 95% of uranium-238, it has 1% of plutonium, it has 1% of uranium-235, it has 3% of the fission fragments. And if you have a reactor accident, all this, in principle, can be released.
And 8 pellets of uranium, each smaller than as a human thumb, will release enough energy to power an average home for 1 year. So that's why it's so important to use uranium.